The wind in the Arizona territory had a voice of its own. It moaned through the brittle sage and over the sun-baked hills like an old ghost, carrying stories no one cared to remember anymore. Out there, on the outer rim of Willow Creek, a mining town clinging to life like a stubborn weed, stood a cabin with its roof sagging under years of dust and solitude. Inside it lived a woman the townsfolk called the Barren Widow. Her name was Abigail Turner, and the desert had made her as hard and quiet as the stones beneath her boots. Once, not too long ago, Abigail had known laughter. She'd been the wife of a railroad foreman, a man named James Turner, who dreamed of linking the frontier to the world beyond. He'd come home each night with coal dust in his hair and a smile in his eyes. They'd planned a life, children, a ranch, maybe even a small orchard by the creek. But fate, like the desert sun, had no mercy. The explosion came without warning. A misplaced charge, a burst of white fire, and the man she loved was gone before she could reach him. She buried him herself, her hands blistered from the shovel, her tears drying into salt before they could touch the soil. The doctor came weeks later, a tired old man with whiskey on his breath. He told her, blunt as a hammer, that the fever which followed her loss had scarred her inside. "You'll never bear a child, Mrs. Turner," he said, looking anywhere but her eyes. After that, something inside her withered. She kept the homestead, though the wind tore at it and the dust crawled in through every crack. The fields turned to clay, the garden to weeds. Still she stayed. She rose before dawn, fed her mare, fetched water from the well, mended fences, and sat in silence as the light faded over the mesas. When she rode into town for supplies, folks would lower their voices. The preacher's wife pitied her. The saloon girls mocked her, and the men simply looked away. A woman alone in those parts was like a candle in the wind, bound to burn out sooner or later. But Abigail Turner didn't burn out. She burned inward. At night, when the wind howled across the plains, she'd sit by her window with a cup of cold coffee and stare at the horizon, at the dark ridges where the sky bled into earth. There was a strange comfort in the silence, the kind of peace that comes only to those who've stopped expecting anything more from life. And yet, somewhere beyond those ridges, someone was watching her. His name was Taza, an Apache warrior once feared and respected in equal measure. He had seen the death of his people's lands, the slaughter of his kin, the burning of sacred groves. Now he wandered, a ghost among men, neither warrior nor outlaw, just a shadow moving through the canyons. One evening, while hunting near the edge of Willow Creek, he saw her. The pale woman with eyes like gray smoke, bending over a patch of dying corn. Her hair caught the wind like silk on fire. He didn't know why he stayed to watch her. Perhaps it was the stillness she carried, a kind of quiet sorrow that called to his own. Day after day, he saw her tending to the same small garden, kneeling in the dirt until her dress was the color of dust. She reminded him of the earth itself, wounded, barren, but still trying to bring forth life. Then came the night of the fire. A band of outlaws, 3 men who'd been run out of the nearest county, rode through the valley, looking for something to steal. They found her farm, where her mare was tied and her lantern still burned. They broke down the door, laughing, shouting, their boots heavy on her floorboards. Abigail fought like a cornered wolf. She swung a poker at the first man, bloodied the second, but they were too many. One grabbed her arm, another reached for her throat, and then came the sound of death itself. A war cry split the night. Out of the dark, Taza came, a blur of shadow and fury. His tomahawk flashed, his knife struck true. The first outlaw fell before he could scream. The second ran, only to be pulled down in the dust. The last man fired his pistol, but the bullet went wide. Taza was on him in an instant, driving him to the ground until the desert was quiet again. The fire from a toppled lantern caught the barn, flames licking upward like devils dancing. Abigail stumbled back, trembling, her nightdress torn and streaked with soot. When her eyes met Taza's, time seemed to halt. He stood tall and silent, his chest rising with each breath, his face painted with ash and blood. The light from the flames flickered across the hard lines of his features, and she saw not a savage, but a man carved by loss, much like herself. Neither spoke. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and smoke. Taza turned to go, but Abigail called out, a single breathless word. "Wait." He paused, his dark eyes finding hers through the rising smoke. She wanted to thank him, but no words came. All she could do was stand there, her hand over her heart as he vanished into the desert night. The next morning, the barn was gone, reduced to blackened beams and ash. The mare was missing, her tack stolen. Abigail spent the day burying what was left of the outlaws, her muscles burning with exhaustion. When dusk came, she saw movement near the ridge, a figure leading her horse back toward the gate. Taza. He said nothing as he handed her the reins. His gaze lingered on her face as if searching for something he couldn't name. Then he turned to leave again, but she stopped him with a whisper. "You saved me," she said. "Why?" Taza looked at her a long while. "No woman should face wolves alone," he said, his voice low and deep. She swallowed, unsure what to say. Gratitude was too small a word. From that day on, she felt him near. Not always seen, but always there. Sometimes she'd catch sight of him on the ridge. Sometimes she'd find her fence repaired, her water barrel full. He never came close enough for words, yet his presence filled the air around her like the hum before a storm. The townsfolk noticed strange tracks near her land. They warned her that the Apache were restless again, that she should sell her farm and move east. But Abigail only smiled faintly and said, "I have no fear of ghosts," for that's what she thought he was, a spirit bound to the land, sent to watch over her. And though she didn't understand it yet, that night, when the barn burned and their eyes met across the firelight, something sacred had begun. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something quieter, older. The meeting of two souls that the world had forgotten, both battered by fate, both searching for meaning in the vast silence of the desert. In the days to come, she would learn his name. She would learn the sound of his laughter, the depth of his sorrow. She would come to understand that the desert was not barren, nor was she. But for now, under the wide, unfeeling sky, Abigail Turner sat by her window and whispered into the wind, "Who are you?" And far beyond the hills, the Apache warrior closed his eyes and answered softly to the night, "The one who remembers." After the fire, the days stretched long and heavy across the Turner homestead. The scent of charred timber still lingered in the air, and the wind carried whispers from the canyon, the kind that made a woman glance over her shoulder more than once. Abigail told herself that the Apache had gone, disappeared into whatever wild country birthed him. But the desert had its own will, and so did he. Taza did not leave. He came like the dawn, quiet, steady, and certain. One morning, when Abigail stepped outside to draw water from the well, she found her fence repaired. The boards were fresh cut, tied with sinew instead of nails. The next day, a stack of firewood appeared by her door, each log perfectly split. She knew then he was still watching. At first, she was afraid. Not of him exactly, but of what his presence meant. If the townsfolk saw an Apache near her home, they'd call her a traitor. Worse, a white woman alone with a native man lurking about was enough to stir every rotten whisper into wildfire. And yet, each time she looked toward the horizon, she hoped to see him. A week passed before he showed himself again. The sun was falling behind the buttes, painting the sky red as spilled blood, when he came walking down from the ridge with a calm stride. He carried a coil of rope and a bundle of hides over his shoulder. Abigail froze at the gate, her heart hammering. "I fix roof," he said simply. She found her voice. "You don't have to." He looked at her then, eyes the color of dark amber. "Wind comes soon. Rain maybe, roof week. You fall asleep under that, you wake under sky." There was a faint spark in his tone. Not arrogance, but certainty, the kind born of a man who had lived by the land all his life. She nodded, stepping aside. He worked until the stars came out. She watched from the window, his silhouette moving against the glow of her lantern. Precise, tireless. When he finished, he came to her porch and stood with his hat in his hands. "You are safe now," he said softly. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated, as if torn between worlds, then gave a slow nod. They ate in silence, beans, cornbread, and the last of her coffee. His manners surprised her. He bowed his head before eating, spoke little, and listened much. When he finally looked up, he said, "This land, you love it even when it tries to kill you." She smiled faintly. "I suppose I do. Guess I don't know where else I'd go." He nodded once, as though he understood that better than anyone. Then he rose, thanked her, and disappeared into the darkness. But after that night, he never stayed away for long. Taza became a fixture of her days. He mended the corral, hunted rabbit and quail for her table, and taught her how to find water by reading the ground. In return, Abigail showed him how to write his name, how to read the weather from the shape of clouds, how to make biscuits from flour and lard. Their words were few, their silences long, but those silences grew comfortable, like a shared secret between them and the land. When she laughed for the first time in years, it startled even her. Taza turned to look, his mouth curved in a rare smile. "You should laugh more," he said. "It sounds like rain." Something in her chest stirred, but Willow Creek noticed. The postmaster's wife saw her riding home with a man in buckskin and spread the tale faster than a prairie fire. By Sunday, the preacher spoke from the pulpit about wicked unions and the danger of heathen blood. Abigail felt their stares burn into her back as she sat alone in the church pew. After the sermon, a rancher's wife approached her and whispered, "You're playing with fire, Mrs. Turner. Those people, they ain't like us." Abigail looked her dead in the eye. "No," she said quietly. "They're not." That night she found Taza waiting by the gate, his face unreadable. "You should send me away," he said. "White men will not like me here." Her throat tightened. "And what about me? You think I care what they like?" He looked toward the horizon where the moon rose pale and full. "You are strong," he murmured. "But the world is cruel to strong women." "So is the world to honest men," she replied. He met her gaze, long, steady, filled with something deeper than words. Then slowly he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand was rough, but his touch was gentler than she'd ever known. "Abigail," he said her name like a prayer, each syllable heavy with meaning. "You are not alone." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she'd always been alone, but she couldn't. Not with the way his eyes held hers, not with the quiet power in his voice. The space between them felt fragile, sacred, alive. He stepped back then as if fearing his own heart, and disappeared once more into the darkness. Summer came hard that year. The earth cracked, the creek dried to a whisper, and the crops withered under the sun's merciless eye. Abigail grew thin from hunger, yet she refused to leave her land. One afternoon she collapsed near the well. When she woke, she was lying beneath her own roof, the air cool and shaded. Taza was there, sitting beside her bed, grinding herbs with a stone. "You are sick," he said. "I'll manage," she whispered, her lips cracked and dry. He frowned. "You try to fight Earth. You must listen instead." He made her drink a bitter tea that stung her throat but cleared her fever. For days he stayed, cooking, fetching water, tending the animals. At night she heard him singing softly in his own tongue, low and haunting. The sound filled the cabin like a prayer. When she finally recovered, she found herself unable to imagine the silence without him. That evening, she joined him outside, where the sunset turned the desert gold. "You saved me again," she said. He looked at her with quiet intensity. "You saved me first," she frowned. "I did nothing." "You looked at me," he said. "Not as white woman, not as enemy, just as man." Her heart stuttered. There in the fading light something passed between them. Not the wild spark of lust, but the deep unspoken pull of two spirits who had been lost too long. Taza stepped closer, his shadow touching hers. "The earth says you are not barren," he said, his voice low, certain. She let out a broken laugh, half bitter, half afraid. "The doctor said otherwise," he shook his head. "Doctors know flesh. The earth knows spirit. Spirit stronger." She turned away, her throat tight. "You talk like dreams mean something." "They do," he whispered. "Dreams are truth waiting for courage." Abigail closed her eyes, the wind lifting her hair. Somewhere deep inside, something long dead began to stir. Not faith. Not yet, but hope. That night, she lay awake listening to the soft rustle of the desert and the steady rhythm of his breath from outside her door. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She felt alive. In the distance, Willow Creek's church bell tolled for evening prayers. The town would curse her name soon enough. But out here, under the same stars that guided both of their peoples, Abigail Turner and Taza sat by a dying fire. Two souls who had no place in the world and yet somehow had found each other. Neither could know what trials waited just beyond the horizon. But as the moon climbed high, Taza turned toward her and said quietly, "Storm coming. Stay close." And though he spoke of weather, Abigail knew he meant much more. The days that followed were made of quiet things: the scrape of a hoe in dry soil, the whistle of wind through cottonwood trees, the soft rhythm of two hearts learning to trust again. Abigail Turner had stopped keeping count of the weeks. Time meant little in the desert. The sun rose, the moon followed, and life went on. Stubborn as a thorn bush, Taza still came and went, sometimes vanishing for days only to reappear with a deer slung over his shoulder or a pouch of wild berries in his hand. He never explained where he'd been, and she never asked. Their companionship had become wordless and sacred. When she knelt to plant, he worked beside her, his hands rough but sure. When she sang softly to herself, old hymns her mother taught her back in Virginia, he listened with that quiet reverence she'd come to know, as if her voice belonged to the land itself. Sometimes, when the heat of the day melted into the cool blue hush of evening, they'd sit on the porch together without speaking. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full, heavy with meaning. Then came the night when silence wasn't enough. The moon was swollen and silver, casting shadows long and thin across the desert. Abigail had been restless all evening, her body thrumming with something she couldn't name. Taza was out by the barn sharpening his knife when the wind shifted, cool, sweet with the promise of rain. She stepped outside, her bare feet brushing against the dry earth. He looked up, and in that still moment everything changed. She saw in him not just a man, but the heartbeat of the land, fierce, gentle, eternal. He saw in her not a widow, not a pale stranger, but a woman of strength and sorrow, someone who had looked death in the eye and kept standing. When their eyes met, words fell away. He rose slowly, setting the knife aside, and crossed the space between them. The desert was utterly silent, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Taza reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You are not afraid," he murmured. "I was," she whispered. "Not anymore." And then he kissed her. It wasn't the timid kiss of two people unsure of their hearts. It was the meeting of fire and storm, the breaking open of years of loneliness and loss. She melted against him, her hands clutching at his shoulders, his skin warm beneath her fingertips. The world disappeared. No towns, no laws, no walls of color or creed. Only two souls finding home in each other. They made love beneath the open sky, the stars their witnesses, the desert wind their choir. The earth seemed to hum around them, ancient and alive. When dawn came, she lay in his arms, watching the light spill over the horizon, her heart full for the first time in years, but peace on the frontier was as fleeting as morning dew. By week's end, whispers reached her door. A ranch hand from Willow Creek had seen a redskin near the Turner place, and tongues wagged like church bells. The postmaster's wife swore she'd spotted an Apache riding her mare down by the creek. Men spat the word savage with venom, and the preacher thundered about unnatural unions and the corruption of Christian womanhood. Abigail tried to ignore them, but fear crept in like smoke. Then came the soldiers. A company of cavalry rode into town, weary from a skirmish in the hills. They were hunting stragglers from an Apache band blamed for a raid near Fort Huachuca. When they heard that a white woman was harboring one of the tribe, they rode straight for her homestead. It was evening when they arrived. 6 men in dust-streaked blue coats, led by a lieutenant young enough to still believe in orders over mercy. Abigail stood in her doorway, her rifle in hand. "You have no right to trespass on my land," she said. The lieutenant tipped his hat, all false politeness. "We're looking for an Apache fugitive. You seen any, ma'am?" Her pulse thudded in her throat. "No," she said evenly. "Just me and my animals," he smirked. "Funny thing. Folks in town say otherwise." Before she could speak, a soldier called out. He'd found Taza's footprints by the well. The lieutenant's expression hardened. "Search the place." They stormed the cabin, overturning furniture, kicking open chests, scattering her meager belongings like trash. One of them found Taza's knife and the one she'd polished that morning. Warren held it up with a grin. "He's been here," the man said. Abigail's world tilted. That's when the lieutenant ordered her tied. "You can tell us where he is," he said coldly, "or you can watch him hang." They didn't have to wait long. Taza came out from the canyon at dusk, drawn by the sight of horses near her home. The moment he appeared on the ridge, the soldiers seized him. He didn't fight, not yet. They bound his hands, beat him bloody, and dragged him into the yard. The lieutenant announced he'd be hanged at sunrise for trespassing on U.S. land. Abigail fell to her knees, begging. "He's done nothing. He saved my life." "Maybe so," the officer said, "but he's Apache. That's crime enough." They left him tied to a post under guard and set up camp a few yards from her house, laughing and drinking around their fire while she sat inside, staring at the walls that had once been her refuge. Something broke inside her that night, the quiet, obedient part that had endured so much loss. When the moon rose, she took her husband's old revolver from the drawer and stepped outside. The guards were drunk. She slipped past them, silent as wind, and reached Taza. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Abigail," he whispered. "You must not—" "Hush," she said, cutting the rope around his wrists. Her hands trembled, but her aim didn't. When a guard stirred, she raised the revolver and fired once into the air. The soldiers jumped up shouting, but it was too late. Taza seized her hand and pulled her toward the mare. They rode into the night as bullets whistled past, the desert swallowing them whole. The storm broke before dawn. Lightning split the sky, rain falling in heavy sheets that turned the ground to mud. They rode hard until the horses faltered, then took shelter in a narrow canyon where the red walls rose like cathedral pillars. There, exhausted and drenched, they dismounted. Abigail's dress clung to her hair wild with rain. Taza turned to her, his face streaked with blood and water, eyes burning with fierce devotion. "You should not have come for me," he said, voice thick with emotion. She cupped his face in her hands. "I'd have died if I hadn't." He caught her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Then we live together or we die together." Thunder rolled across the sky like war drums. She leaned into him, their foreheads touching. The storm howled around them, but inside that canyon, there was only warmth, the kind born of two souls who had finally chosen each other, no matter the cost. They made a fire from dry brush and huddled close, sharing what little food they had left. Outside, the rain poured, washing away all trace of their flight. When morning came, the world was quiet again. The soldiers were gone, the trail erased. They were alone, free but hunted. Abigail looked at the horizon, endless, untamed, and terrifyingly beautiful. Taza took her hand and said softly, "We go where earth hides us, you and me." She nodded, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. "Then take me there, Taza. I've got nothing left to lose." And together they disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind a world that could never understand them, and riding toward one that just might. The desert had swallowed them whole. Days turned into weeks as Abigail and Taza wandered deeper into the wild country, a place so barren that even the cavalry wouldn't dare follow. They slept beneath the open sky, ate what little they could hunt, and drank from the veins of the land when they found water glimmering in the rock. It was a harsh life, but it was theirs. They followed the whisper of the wind and the shape of the stars until they found a narrow valley, hidden between cliffs of red stone. A small spring trickled through it, feeding patches of green where willows grew like a promise from God. There they built their refuge, part hut, part cave, part dream. Taza said it was a sacred place, known to his people as Shikai, meaning heart of the earth. No white man had ever set foot there, and few of his tribe even remembered its name. It was, he told her, a place where spirits listened. For the first time in her life, Abigail felt truly safe. Every morning she woke to birdsong instead of gunfire. Taza would be up before dawn, tracking deer or setting snares, his silhouette framed against the pink wash of sunrise. He moved like a part of the world, quiet, sure, ancient. She began to live again, truly live. She tended the small patch of earth near the spring, coaxing corn from the soil with her bare hands. She washed clothes in the stream, baked bread over coals, and learned the songs Taza hummed to the sky each evening. Sometimes she caught herself smiling for no reason at all. The lines on her face softened. Her laughter, once rare as rain, came freely now. One night, as they sat beside the fire, she looked at him and said, "I think I was dead before I met you." Taza's dark eyes met hers. "No," he said softly. "You were waiting, but the desert tested all who loved it." That summer, the rains came late. The heat pressed down like a hammer, and the air shimmered with the scent of dust and sage. Abigail began to feel strange, Weary, lightheaded, her stomach unsettled in the mornings. She thought it was the heat or the meager food, until one dawn she woke and felt something flutter deep within her belly. At first, she didn't believe it. It was impossible. She sat by the spring, trembling, remembering the doctor's cold words from years ago. "You'll never bear a child, Mrs. Turner." She pressed a hand to her abdomen, whispering, "No, it can't be." But then the flutter came again, unmistakable, like a heartbeat under her palm. That evening, she told Taza. He listened in silence, then knelt beside her, placing his hand gently over hers. His face lit with a quiet awe. "The earth keeps her promise," he said. "You are the vessel of life." Tears burned her eyes. "But it isn't possible, Taza. I was told—" He shook his head. "You were told by men who do not know the spirit. The land gives when the heart is ready." She wept then, not from fear but from wonder. She'd been called barren, cursed, pitied. Now the impossible had bloomed inside her like a desert flower after rain. From that night on, Taza treated her as something holy. He sang to her belly, old Apache songs of birth and strength, words she didn't understand but felt deep in her bones. He built a cradle from willow branches and lined it with soft rabbit fur. He hunted more often, bringing back the best meat and herbs to keep her strong. The months passed. Her body swelled with life, and with it came a peace she'd never known. One cold evening in late autumn, the wind turned cruel. The sky bruised dark and thunder rumbled across the canyons. Taza sensed the storm before it hit. He gathered wood and sealed their shelter with hides, whispering prayers to the four winds. That night, as lightning tore the sky, Abigail went into labor. Pain came like waves, sharp, relentless, tearing through her like the earth splitting open. She bit down on her lip, gripping Taza's hand until her knuckles whitened. He knelt beside her, eyes steady, voice calm as stone. "Breathe, Abigail. You are strong. The spirits are here." Hours passed. The rain roared against the rocks, the fire sputtered, and still she pushed, cried, prayed. She thought she would die. Then, at the break of dawn, a cry split the storm. High, fierce, alive. A baby's cry. Taza lifted the small, blood-slicked child into his arms and let out a sound that was half laughter, half tears. "A boy," he whispered. "A warrior born of two worlds." Abigail lay back, weak but smiling, tears streaming down her cheeks. When he placed the baby on her chest, she felt his tiny heartbeat. Strong, defiant. "He's real," she sobbed. "He's real," Taza kissed her forehead. "He is the desert's gift." Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, washing the world clean. They named him Kohana, meaning swift wind. He was beautiful. Dark hair like his father's, skin kissed with gold, eyes as blue-gray as a coming storm. He grew strong and curious, crawling before he could walk, running before he could speak full words. Abigail would sit by the stream, watching him play in the shallows, his laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Each sound was a miracle to her, a note in the song she'd thought she'd never hear. Taza would lift the boy high into the air, saying, "You are the bridge, my son. You will walk in both worlds." At night, when the boy slept, Abigail would lie against Taza's chest, tracing the lines of his scars. "You gave me life again," she whispered once. He smiled faintly. "No, you found it yourself. I only showed you the way." Seasons turned. They lived simply, in harmony with the land, planting by the moon, hunting by the wind. The boy learned to run barefoot over the red earth, to mimic the cries of hawks, to listen when the land spoke. But though they had peace, danger still lingered beyond the canyon. Rumors drifted, settlers pushing deeper into Apache lands, soldiers clearing valleys for progress. Taza knew it was only a matter of time before the world found them again. One morning, he stood on the ridge with Kohana in his arms and said, "Someday they will come. When they do, you will protect what is good." Abigail joined him, placing her hand over his. "If they come," she said firmly, "we'll face them together." He looked at her, pride softening his features. "You are stronger than any warrior I've known," she smiled. "That's because I learned from one." That night, as the stars shimmered above and the boy slept beside them, the two sat in silence, hand in hand. The air was cool and sweet, the fire crackling low. Taza turned to her and said, Do you remember what I told you? That the earth knows spirit better than flesh? I remember. He touched her cheek. The spirit saw you long before I did. It knew you were part of this land and it called me to you. Abigail leaned against him, her eyes on the sleeping child. Then the earth has mercy after all. The earth, he said softly, always gives back what love plants. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of rain and life, and in that hidden valley, yet untouched by hate, untouched by the noise of man, the barren widow who had once been broken now held both love and life in her arms, a miracle born of a love that defied the world. The years passed like wind over stone. The small valley, hidden deep in the Apache desert, became more than a home. It became a world, a place untouched by greed, by the thunder of guns or the laws of men. For Abigail and Taza, it was Eden reborn, a sanctuary carved out of the wilderness where love had triumphed over the impossible. Their boy, Kohana, grew strong beneath that wide, wild sky. He learned the Apache ways from his father, how to read the wind, how to track a deer by the faintest print, how to speak to the land in silence. From his mother he learned compassion, how to heal with herbs, how to listen to the cries of others, how to see the beauty in what the world called broken. By the time he was 10, he could ride bareback through the ravine like a spirit himself, his laughter echoing through the canyons. To the hawks he was a brother, to the earth, a son. Sometimes Abigail would watch him from the doorway, the sunlight warming her face, and whisper a prayer of thanks. Every day he breathed was a reminder that miracles weren't just written in scripture. They lived, walked, and laughed beside her. But the world beyond their desert refuge was changing fast. The U.S. cavalry had pushed deeper into Apache territory, hunting the last of the free tribes. The railroad followed behind, carving its iron trail across the wilderness, bringing settlers hungry for land and gold. One morning, smoke rose in the far distance, thin, gray, and unnatural. Taza watched it from the ridge, his face hard as carved stone. "They're burning the old camps," he said quietly. "They will come this way soon." Abigail's heart twisted. "Then we'll go deeper into the desert, won't we?" He shook his head. "There is no deeper left to go. The white man builds his world where ours ends." For days afterward, Taza prepared, sharpening blades, setting snares, teaching Kohana how to move silently through the brush. He didn't tell the boy about war or soldiers or the meaning of the smoke. He simply said, "The wind changes. We must be ready, but fate, as ever, does not ask permission." It was near sunset when they came, a small patrol of 6 men in blue coats, riding tired horses with dust in their eyes and greed in their hearts. They had heard tales of an Apache ghost, hiding with a white woman and a child, tales told by frightened settlers and bounty men who spoke of the valley that shouldn't exist. When the soldiers stumbled upon the spring, they found smoke curling from a small fire and the faint laughter of a child. The sergeant raised his rifle. "Fan out. The squaw and the kid are here somewhere." From the shadows an arrow hissed through the air. It struck one man clean through the throat before he could scream. Taza moved like a shadow, silent, deadly, righteous. He took 2 more before they even found cover. But there were too many, and they were desperate men. A shot rang out, echoing across the cliffs. Abigail screamed. Taza staggered, blood blooming bright against his chest. Kohana ran to him, small hands clutching at his father's arm, but Taza pushed him back. "No, my son. You must protect your mother. Go," but the boy didn't move. He stood trembling, eyes burning with something fierce and ancient. Abigail grabbed the rifle from beside the fire and fired once, twice, each shot wild but full of fury. She killed the sergeant before he reached them, then dropped to her knees beside Taza. He was still breathing, shallow, broken breaths that rattled like dry leaves. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing her hands to the wound. "Please, Taza, stay with me." He reached up, fingers brushing her cheek. "No tears, Abigail. I go where the spirits call. Our love will live through him." His hand fell, his eyes stilled. The desert went silent. When the smoke cleared, 3 soldiers lay dead. The others fled, swearing they'd seen the devil himself rise from the canyon. Abigail buried Taza beneath the willow by the spring, marking the grave with a carved stone. Kohana stood beside her, small and solemn, holding a feather in his hand. "He'll walk with the wind now," the boy whispered. She nodded through her tears. "Yes, my love. And we'll keep walking where he left us." Months passed. The soldiers never returned, whether from fear or superstition, no one knew. The valley grew quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. The laughter that once filled the canyons was softer, the songs slower, more like prayers. Kohana grew quickly, tall and proud, his father's fire in his eyes, and his mother's gentleness in his heart. By 15, he was a warrior in spirit, though he fought not with rage, but with wisdom. He began to wander beyond the valley, helping those caught between two worlds, settlers lost in the desert, natives fleeing from raids. He carried no banner, no allegiance, just a quiet strength that drew people to him. Word spread of the half-blood who healed, not killed, who rode with the wind and spoke to the earth itself. They called him the Miracle Child. Years later, traders and travelers passing through Arizona spoke of a young man who appeared when storms threatened or sickness spread. They said he could find water where none was seen, calm a horse with a touch, mend wounds that should have taken lives. When asked where he came from, he would only say, "From where the earth remembers mercy." Few believed him, but the story grew. Around campfires and in frontier towns, whispers turned to legend. A woman who had once been barren gave birth to a boy under the Apache moon, and a boy born of love so pure that even the desert bowed to it. They said he carried his father's spirit and his mother's heart, a bridge between white and red, between life and death, between the broken past and what might still be healed. As for Abigail, she grew old beneath that same wide sky. Her hair silvered, her hands roughened with time, but her eyes still held that same fire, the light of a woman who had lived beyond despair. Every morning, she walked to Taza's grave with a cup of water and a prayer. She told him stories of their son, where he rode, who he helped, how the people whispered his name. Sometimes, when the wind swept through the canyon just right, she swore she heard a voice in the rustle of leaves, deep, calm and loving. "He walks where the heart leads, Abigail. You have done well." She would smile, tears bright in her eyes. "So have you, my love. So have you." And when her time finally came, she lay down beside that grave beneath the willow tree, the desert wind soft upon her cheek. Her last words were a whisper carried on the breeze. Together again. Years later, when travelers stumbled upon that hidden spring, they found two stones side by side and a small carving between them. A feather, a heart, and a rising sun. They built no church there, but the place became sacred. Couples seeking hope came to pray beside those graves. Women who'd been told they'd never bear children. Men who'd lost their faith in love, and every so often, when the wind rose in the stillness, they swore they heard it. Faint, tender, eternal. The laughter of a child echoing through the desert. The laughter of the miracle born of love.